You woke up this morning thinking it was just another day, didn't you? Same ceiling, same routine, same tired thoughts crawling around your head. But somewhere between the first blink and the first breath, you did something different. Something small, maybe. Something no one else would even notice. But it cracked the pattern. It shifted the script. And most people don't realize how rare that is, how rare you were, just for a moment. Because while the world keeps spinning in circles, repeating the same tired dance, you stepped even an inch outside that loop. And that inch, that's where unbelievable things begin. Most people wake up and go through the motions, believing that every day is just another blur of sameness. Alarm rings, eyes squint, feet hit the floor, and the mind immediately starts calculating the next step, the next obligation, the next chore that must be done. The pattern repeats like a broken record, a song stuck in the static of routine, and they tell themselves nothing ever changes. That life is a series of small, inconsequential steps, each one blending into the other, but then without fanfare, without applause, without even the slightest notice. You did something different this morning, something so simple, so minuscule in the eyes of the world, that no one would ever write a headline about it. Yet in its quietness, it shattered the pattern. It might have been as small as opening your eyes and deciding not to hit snooze, as trivial as choosing to stand up before the world demanded it. Maybe it was saying a single sentence out loud to yourself that you've been avoiding for weeks, or deciding to drink water before coffee for the first time in months. None of it seems remarkable on the surface. No one stood by the bed and cheered you on. No one took a video. But the unbelievable part isn't in what they saw, it's in the choice you made. The moment you chose differently, you created a ripple in the stagnant pond of repetition, the pond that most people never dare disturb, because it's safer to float along than to rock the surface and risk the unknown. You did it while the rest of the world slept, while the streets were empty and the sky was still bruised from the night. You acted. And that's the point. The unbelievable isn't always loud. It's not always dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's in the spaces no one notices. The world is addicted to spectacle, to noise, to flash, but true power often lives in the corners, in the shadows, in the small moments that are completely invisible until they compound into something undeniable. What you did this morning may seem invisible to them, but it is absolutely seismic for you. Every monumental change, every radical shift, every unbelievable story begins in these little moments. Think about it. The people who appear unstoppable, who inspire, who seem larger than life, didn't start by walking onto stages, signing contracts, or being applauded. They started with the tiny, unbelievable moments nobody else witnessed. The moment they decided to try, the moment they decided not to quit, the moment they chose to wake up differently from yesterday. They started in silence, in corners, in mornings like yours. And it's in those mornings that the trajectory of a life is quietly rewritten. You just participated in that quiet revolution. You just whispered rebellion into the script that says mornings are always the same. And here is the strange thing about the unbelievable. It doesn't have to be dramatic to be effective. It doesn't need fireworks. It doesn't need cameras. It doesn't need validation. It just needs action. Action that breaks the pattern. Action that says, I'm not the same as yesterday. And you did that. You made a choice. Maybe it was conscious. Maybe it was instinctual. Maybe it was subtle enough that you barely even noticed it yourself. But the difference is that you acted. Most people drift through the morning as if it belongs to someone else, as if they are puppets on a string, but you tugged the string yourself. You pushed yourself into a space where nothing was guaranteed, where no one was guiding you, and that is inherently unbelievable. When you do something unbelievable in the quiet of the morning, it sets the tone for the entire day. It creates a rhythm that the world cannot dictate. It is a declaration, even if unspoken, that you are not powerless, that your choices have weight, that your life is not a series of coincidences, but a series of intentions, however small. Every step, every breath, every small defiance compounds. And in that quiet, unnoticed defiance, you begin to build momentum. Momentum that cannot be stopped by external validation, by noise, by distraction, by those who do not see. You alone are witnessing it, and that is enough. So yes, what you did this morning might seem trivial to anyone else, but to you it is everything. Because you acted. You interrupted the autopilot of life. You chose differently. You cracked the ordinary just enough for something extraordinary to seep through. And the unbelievable begins not with grand gestures, not with fireworks, not with crowds, but with the kind of small, defiant, unobserved action that you took this morning. Fear is a funny thing. It hides in the corners of your mind, whispering lies in your ear, telling you that you can't, that you shouldn't, that the world will swallow you whole if you try. Most people wake up and let fear dictate the first hour of their day, letting hesitation wrap itself around their chest like a noose. But this morning you didn't. You didn't let it. You faced it, even in the smallest way, and that is what makes what you did unbelievable. Not because the world noticed, not because someone wrote it down or cheered for you, but because fear is a master manipulator and you just cut its strings before breakfast. Maybe it was the courage to speak, to say one sentence that carried all the weight of months of silence. Maybe it was the courage to leave your bed, to stop hiding under the warmth of blankets that felt like safety but were slowly suffocating you. Maybe it was the courage to make a choice that you've been avoiding, a decision that felt too heavy, too risky, too impossible. Whatever it was, it required a confrontation with yourself, with the voice that says, you're not enough, you can't do this, stay down, stay small. And you didn't listen. You acted, you moved, you did the unbelievable thing, because you refused to be paralyzed by the chains of fear. The people around you, the ones who never take risks, who never challenge themselves, they can't understand this. They go through life like drones, content with the comfort of the ordinary, terrified of the unpredictable. But courage isn't about fear disappearing. Courage is about fear existing and moving anyway. It's about doing something when your body screams to stay put, when your mind plots every reason to retreat, when your instincts beg for safety. Courage doesn't wait for the perfect conditions. It doesn't ask for applause. It doesn't seek permission. And that's why what you did this morning is unbelievable, because it was brave, it was raw, it was real, and it was entirely yours. Most people confuse courage with heroism. They think you need a crowd, a spotlight, a dramatic gesture. They think fear can only be conquered in moments that matter to the world. But the truth is, the most powerful acts of courage are invisible. They happen in bedrooms, in kitchens, in bathrooms, in quiet streets, in moments where no one is watching and the world doesn't care. It is in these moments that the foundations of greatness are laid. Every monumental choice starts with a small act of defiance against fear, a tiny rebellion against the voice that says you can't. And you did exactly that. Think about the weight of what it means to act in spite of fear. Your hands shake, your mind races, your heart pounds, and yet you keep moving. Every step feels like a rebellion against a lifetime of conditioning, every breath of victory against the stories you've been telling yourself for years. You did something unbelievable because you stared at the thing that terrified you most, the thing you thought would break you, and you didn't flinch. You didn't freeze. You didn't retreat. You stepped forward, even if it was just a single, trembling step, and in that step you claimed a little piece of your life back. Fear is patient. It waits. It will try again tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. It whispers that yesterday was a fluke, that today will be harder, that tomorrow will crush you. But you've already shown it that it can be confronted. You've already proven to yourself that courage exists within you. You've already done something that makes the impossible feel tangible. And that changes everything. Because once fear has been stared down even for a moment, it begins to lose its power, and you gain yours. What makes this morning unbelievable isn't a headline, a trophy, or a crowd. It's the fact that you confronted yourself, that you acknowledged the weight of fear, and you acted anyway. That you took the first domino, tipped it over, and watched the momentum of courage begin to roll. Every day afterward, every choice, every small act of bravery builds on that first moment. And the ripple of courage, started quietly in the morning, spreads farther than anyone watching could. Imagine you did something unbelievable because you acted when every part of you wanted to hesitate, because you refused to be frozen by fear, because you understood that the only way forward is to move, no matter how small the step, no matter how shaky the hands, no matter how loud the doubt. You didn't wait for confidence to arrive. You created it through action. You didn't wait for someone else to notice. You claimed it for yourself. And that is the kind of unbelievable courage that sets the tone for everything else that follows. People forget how much power lies in a single choice. They wake up, drag themselves through the motions, and assume life is something that happens to them, that the day is a river carrying them wherever it pleases. But this morning you made a choice, a small one maybe, a quiet one, but a choice nonetheless. And in that choice, something remarkable happened, something that most people will never see, never understand, never even imagine. Because the unbelievable isn't always a spectacle. It's often the subtle refusal to be ordinary, the tiny insistence that you matter, enough to act when everyone else is asleep, distracted, or too comfortable to move. Maybe it was the choice to stand instead of sit, to speak instead of stay silent, to do the thing you've been putting off for weeks, months, maybe years, the thing that seemed too heavy, too distant, too impossible. And the world, of course, didn't cheer. No one was there to clap, to nod, to validate. The morning didn't pause for you. But that doesn't matter, because choices like this are unseen fireworks. They explode quietly inside you, inside your mind, inside the trajectory of your life. You can't measure them in applause. You can't quantify them in likes or pats on the back. You measure them in the shift they create in your soul and the gravity they build beneath your feet. Every day, people follow patterns, routines, scripts written by everyone except themselves. Alarm rings, coffee brews, the same commute, the same conversations, the same excuses, and they tell themselves it's normal, safe, practical, predictable. But predictability is the enemy of the unbelievable. The unbelievable emerges only when you disrupt the pattern, when you act in a way that doesn't fit neatly into the expectations others have written for you. And this morning, even if only in a small, seemingly insignificant way, you disrupted the pattern. You chose differently. You made a move that the rest of the world would dismiss, but that was monumental for you. Power often hides in these unnoticed choices. People chase dramatic changes, loud victories, grand gestures. They crave visible proof that someone is doing something extraordinary. But real power, the kind that shifts trajectories, doesn't announce itself. It whispers. It slips past the eyes of the inattentive. It waits for the moment when the world is blind and acts anyway. And that's what you did. You whispered to the world without even lifting your voice. You moved the pieces quietly, deliberately, in a way that set something bigger in motion than anyone could see. Consider how rare it is to act before the crowd notices, to step forward when no one else is watching, to make a choice without expectation of reward. That rarity is what makes the morning unbelievable. People spend their lives waiting for validation, for recognition, for confirmation. They stall, hesitate, and settle. But you didn't wait. You didn't hesitate. You didn't settle. And even if the choice seemed tiny, a single moment, a single action, it represents the fracture in the monotony, the crack in the routine, the opening where change begins. Choice is a declaration. It is proof that you are not merely a passenger in your own life, that you can bend the path, that you can rewrite the narrative in small, powerful strokes. Every monumental transformation starts in moments like this. Every story that feels larger than life begins with the kind of decision that seems invisible to the world, but is seismic for the person making it. And you made one this morning. You claimed agency when it was easier to stay passive. You planted a seed when it was easier to wait for rain. You refused to be ordinary even when ordinary was safe. The unbelievable doesn't need a witness. It doesn't need applause or attention. It only requires action. And action breeds momentum. One choice leads to another. One step forward lays the foundation for the next. And the person who acts, even quietly, even invisibly, begins to move faster than the world expects. You did that this morning. You created a spark, a tremor, a ripple in the pond of your own life that will spread farther than anyone could measure. And the ripple starts with you, with your choice, with the moment you decide not to wait. Most people never realize the weight of such choices. They underestimate the quiet revolution that begins when someone refuses to follow the expected path, when someone dares to act differently, when someone claims their agency in the shadows of routine. But that is exactly what happened. You chose differently, and that choice carries with it the beginning of something larger, something unstoppable, something that will not be erased by the monotony of the day, by the disbelief of others, or by the smallness that most people settle for in their mornings. Most people wake up every morning and follow the same map, the same script, the same lines written by yesterday, by habit, by expectation. They hit snooze, they scroll their phones, they shuffle through routines that make life predictable, safe, and painfully ordinary. And they tell themselves, this is all there is, this rhythm, this sameness, this autopilot existence. But this morning, you didn't follow the script. You didn't repeat the pattern. You did something different, something small yet seismic, something invisible yet powerful. You acted where most people would hesitate. You moved where most people would stay frozen. And in that small divergence, you created a moment that is quietly, undeniably unbelievable. It might have been a single decision, almost unnoticeable, a decision to rise when your body begged for comfort, to face a task you've been avoiding, to speak when you might have stayed silent. Maybe it was taking responsibility for something you usually ignore. Maybe it was choosing to act with integrity when shortcuts whispered their easy, deceptive lullabies. Whatever it was a defiance of inertia. And defiance, even the smallest when performed in the silence of the morning, carries with it a weight that the world cannot see but the universe notices. That's how the unbelievable begins, not with fireworks, not with applause, not with recognition, but with a simple, deliberate choice to do something differently. Most people think that being noticed, being admired, being applauded is what gives an action its value. But the truth is, the morning is a private battlefield, a place where the most significant victories happen unseen, when the world is asleep, when eyes are elsewhere, when no one is paying attention. That is where courage is measured. That is where discipline is forged. That is where character is revealed. You did something this morning that no one might know about, and that makes it more real, more raw, more powerful than any action performed for recognition. The unbelievable thrives in obscurity, in spaces where no one can inflate or diminish it, where the only witness is your own awareness. Think about the ripple effect of what it means to disrupt a pattern. Every time you act differently than the autopilot expects, you plant a seed of change. Every small, deliberate action alters the trajectory of your day, of your decisions, of your mindset. And while the rest of the world drifts along like passengers on a train they think they control, you are the conductor, even if just for a moment. You choose the direction, the speed, the energy. You create momentum where others allow stagnation. And that momentum, quiet as it is, cannot be erased by skepticism, by routine, by the complacency of others. The unbelievable doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't require fanfare. The world rewards spectacle because spectacle is easy to see, easy to digest, easy to pretend matters. But you acted in a space that the spectacle cannot reach. You claimed victory where the eyes are closed, in moments where no one can judge, in actions where intention outweighs visibility. That is how real change begins, by taking ownership of your own agency before anyone else even notices you have it. That is how the small, unseen defiance of routine grows into something unstoppable, something that reshapes habits, decisions, and even identity. Every morning, fear, laziness, comfort, and habit stand at the doorway and whisper, stay down, don't move, wait. And most people listen. Most people hit snooze, procrastinate, pause, avoid. But you didn't. You acted. You chose momentum over inertia, risk over comfort, agency over passivity. And that tiny rebellion, that single act, is unbelievable because it defies the default expectation of human behavior. It proves to yourself that you are not bound by the ordinary, that your choices matter, and that your light does not belong to autopilot. What you did this morning also sets the tone for everything else that follows. Every choice you make from this moment onward is built on the foundation of the courage, discipline, and deliberate action you demonstrated earlier. Every decision is easier because you've proven to yourself that you are capable. Every hesitation loses a little of its power because you confronted the inertia head on and refused to surrender. You created a precedent for yourself, and precedent, once established, is the invisible scaffolding that supports every subsequent act of audacity, resilience, and growth. People might never see it. They might never say it. They might never understand the weight of what you accomplished. But that's irrelevant. The unbelievable is not defined by witnesses. It is defined by action, by the act of moving when everyone else is still, by the act of claiming your own agency when others hand theirs to routine, by the act of writing a small, private revolution into the beginning of your day. And this morning you did exactly that. Quietly, defiantly, beautifully, unbelievably. People spend their lives chasing recognition, applause, approval, as if their worth depends on the eyes of others. They perform for validation, bend themselves into shapes that fit the expectations of everyone around them, and call it living. But what you did this morning wasn't for anyone else. You didn't need an audience, a nod, a comment, a like. You acted for yourself, and that's what makes it extraordinary. Confidence without attention is a quiet kind of rebellion. It doesn't seek permission, it doesn't beg for approval, and it doesn't rely on the applause of the crowd. Yet, somehow, it commands more attention than the loudest performance in the room. Imagine the world as a stage full of people dancing for recognition, screaming to be seen, desperate for validation like addicts chasing a hit. They bend over backward to fit into roles, to shape their actions around the expectation of others, to be wanted because they are afraid of being invisible. And then there's you. This morning you didn't follow the script. You didn't perform. You didn't seek to impress anyone. You didn't even glance at the audience. You simply acted with purpose, with clarity, with a quiet understanding that your value doesn't need to be borrowed from someone else. And that alone is disorienting, compelling, and magnetic. People are addicted to control. They expect life to move in predictable ways. They assume that influence comes from shouting louder, showing more, proving constantly that you exist in their universe. But when someone moves differently, when someone carries themselves with confidence, that doesn't ask to be acknowledged. It breaks their assumptions. You didn't need permission to act. You didn't wait for their approval. You didn't rely on their gaze. And that refusal to conform to their expectations is the kind of power most people will never understand. It's invisible, yet it shifts the energy in the room. It makes the world lean toward you without anyone realizing why. Confidence that doesn't seek attention is not arrogance. It is an unshakable understanding of your own worth. It is the ability to move, speak, and decide without calculating every reaction. This morning, every small choice you made, the decision to rise, to act, to move toward what matters, was a quiet declaration. You do not depend on anyone's recognition to exist. And in that quietness lies strength. In that quietness lies the unbelievable. While others are busy performing, you've already taken control of the narrative that belongs to you. You don't announce it, you simply live it. And the more you live it, the more people can't help but notice. Think about it. The loudest people, the ones desperate for approval, are predictable. You know their next move before it happens. Their confidence is fragile, dependent on constant reinforcement. But someone who doesn't need attention, someone who doesn't chase validation, that person is unpredictable. That person carries weight in a room because their presence is not contingent on the approval of others. And that unpredictability draws eyes, curiosity, and eventually respect. People want what they can't control, and your quiet confidence is the very thing they can't manipulate. It's easy to overlook small actions, to dismiss them as inconsequential. But the truth is, confidence without attention builds quietly, invisibly, with far-reaching consequences. One act this morning, simply acting without seeking acknowledgement, sets the tone for the day. It establishes a precedent, a standard. It tells yourself, and the world that your choices matter independent of external recognition, and every subsequent decision, every action you take, compounds on that foundation. You create momentum that no applause, no comment, no validation could ever give you, and it begins with a single, silent act of self-assuredness. People think visibility equals influence, that being seen is the same as being powerful. They misunderstand entirely. True influence comes from substance, not spectacle. It comes from the kind of confidence that doesn't fluctuate based on external opinion. The morning you acted without attention, without needing recognition, you planted the seed of something enduring, something that grows quietly, invisibly, beyond the gaze of those addicted to applause. You didn't perform. You didn't show off. You simply acted, and in that act, you became more powerful than all the noise in the world could ever be. And the beauty of it is, this kind of confidence is self-sustaining. It doesn't demand reinforcement. It doesn't require acknowledgement. It doesn't weaken when the world ignores it. Every small, deliberate act of self-trust compounds into resilience, clarity, and gravity. You carried yourself differently this morning, moved differently this morning, decided differently this morning, and in doing so, you proved something to yourself that no one else could ever take away. Your worth, your strength, and your influence do not depend on the eyes of anyone else. People live their lives as if the rules were written in stone, as if every decision, every step, every movement had to fit neatly into a pattern crafted by someone else. They look at the world, see what is expected, what is approved, what is tolerated, and they shape themselves accordingly. They follow instructions, follow trends, follow advice without questioning whether it aligns with who they truly are. But you didn't do that this morning. You refused to follow someone else's script. You refused to bend for the comfort of others. You moved on your own terms. And that refusal, that quiet rebellion, is the beginning of something unpredictable, something powerful, something unbelievable. Unpredictability makes people uncomfortable. Humans crave order. They cling to patterns. They measure life by predictability. They want people to react the way they expect, to fit into neat little boxes, to conform to rules they barely understand themselves. But when you step outside of those boxes, when you refuse to play by their rules, when you make a choice that doesn't fit their expectations, you become an anomaly. And anomalies aren't easily ignored. Anomalies draw attention, even when they make no effort to be seen. You didn't try to impress anyone. You didn't follow the script. You simply acted differently, and that alone starts to shift everything around you. Most people mistake predictability for safety. They think that if you move as expected, if you behave as expected, if you follow the rules they understand, you will survive, you will be accepted, you will succeed. But predictability is a cage. It confines the mind, limits the possibilities, and dulls the spirit. You, this morning, refused that cage. You acted according to your own rhythm, your own rules, your own understanding of what was necessary. And that refusal to conform carries a kind of power that cannot be calculated, cannot be forced, and cannot be predicted. When you refuse to follow the rules, people start to notice. At first, maybe they don't understand why. They see your choices, your movements, your decisions, and their first reaction is confusion. They try to place you back into a box, to categorize you, to label you so that you feel more familiar, more controllable, more safe. But you resist categorization. You resist labels. You resist being tamed by expectation. And that resistance, that unpredictability, becomes magnetic. People lean in, not because they can control you, but because they can't. They are drawn to the anomaly, even as they try to rationalize it, even as they fear it. Unpredictability doesn't mean chaos. It doesn't mean reckless, wild actions. It means self-direction. It means independence. It means acting according to your own understanding, not the expectations of others. It means creating your own rhythm in a world addicted to monotony. When you refused to follow the rules this morning, you declared your autonomy. You reminded yourself that you are not a puppet, that your actions are your own, that your choices matter even if no one else understands them. And that declaration, quiet as it may be, is unbelievable people want to control what they can see. They want to predict behavior, to anticipate outcomes, to mold others to fit their expectations. But you are not their creation. You are not their expectation. You are not a puzzle they can solve. By refusing to follow the rules, by refusing to act as they expect, you introduce chaos into their comfortable assumptions. You become the variable they can't calculate, the presence they can't ignore, the force they didn't anticipate. And that force is magnetic, compelling, and undeniably powerful. Every action you took this morning that refused the ordinary is a statement. Every small deviation, every deliberate choice outside the expected is a reminder that you are in control of your life, even in moments that seem inconsequential. The world may not see it, they may not understand it, they may not approve, but that doesn't matter. You've claimed your autonomy, you've shown that the rules are yours to interpret, to bend, or to break. And that kind of unpredictability doesn't just disrupt expectations, it creates opportunity, influence, and strength. The unbelievable is rarely loud. It rarely asks for attention. It doesn't follow the script. It doesn't wait for permission. It simply exists. And this morning, in your refusal to follow the rules, you existed in a way that disrupted the ordinary. You moved with a rhythm the world didn't expect. You acted with intention that no one anticipated. And in doing so, you became a force that is quietly, undeniably, and irresistibly magnetic. People go through their mornings thinking they are doing something ordinary. They wake up, stretch, stumble through the motions, and convince themselves that they are alive because they moved, not because they acted. But what you did this morning was far from ordinary. You acted when most people would hesitate. You made a choice when most people would wait. You did something so small, so quiet, and yet so radical that it shifts the trajectory of your day, your mindset, and perhaps even your life. It's the kind of act that seems invisible to the world, but monumental to the one who dares to do it. Maybe it was getting out of bed when every part of you wanted to sink deeper under the covers. Maybe it was choosing to face a fear that you have been avoiding, one that has been lurking quietly in the corners of your mind for weeks or months. Maybe it was simply deciding to start to move, to take that first step towards something you've been postponing. Whatever it was, it required a moment of courage, not the kind that is cheered or filmed, not the kind that earns applause or recognition, the kind that exists quietly in the space between thought and action, in the split second where hesitation meets choice. People underestimate the power of small acts. They assume that nothing significant can happen unless it is grand, visible, celebrated. But the truth is that the world's most extraordinary changes begin with a single, unseen decision. Every great transformation, every monumental success, every life-altering shift starts with a tiny defiance against comfort, against inertia, against the familiar. And this morning you defied the familiar. You stepped away from routine, from autopilot, from the invisible scripts that most people blindly follow. That step, however small, is the spark that lights the fire of the unbelievable. There's a strange magic in moments like these. The world doesn't notice them. They pass without commentary, without recognition, without applause. And that is exactly what makes them so powerful. They are unclaimed victories, personal revolutions that belong entirely to the person who dares to act. You didn't do this for anyone else. You didn't do this for validation. You didn't do this for approval. You did it because something inside of you refused to be passive, refused to be a passenger, refused to wait for life to happen to you. That refusal is the essence of the unbelievable. Most people are addicted to comfort. They stay small because it feels safe. They delay because hesitation feels easier than action. They cling to the familiar because it is predictable. But unpredictability, courage, and initiative, those are the traits that shape destiny. And this morning you acted. You chose unpredictability over routine, courage over complacency, initiative over passivity. Even if the act was invisible to everyone else, it was seismic in the context of your own life. It shifted your energy, your mindset, your momentum. It changed the way you will approach the hours that follow. The unbelievable isn't always dramatic. It doesn't need fireworks, audiences, or accolades. It often lives in the quiet, in the unseen, in the moments where no one is watching but you would exist, in the split second where you choose to act despite hesitation, to speak despite fear, to move despite comfort. Every small choice compounds. Every small act builds on the last, and before long, those invisible actions create a force that is impossible to ignore. And this morning, you created that force. You began it. You planted the first seed of momentum that will grow, stretch, and expand in ways you may not yet see. Think about the people who underestimate themselves, the ones who tell themselves that mornings are boring, ordinary, inevitable. They will never understand what you did. They will never see the quiet rebellion, the small courage, the deliberate defiance of inertia. But that doesn't matter. The unbelievable is not defined by recognition. It is defined by action, by the choice to step forward when no one is watching, by the refusal to remain passive. And this morning you did exactly that. You chose action over stagnation, courage over fear, initiative over hesitation, and in doing so, you did something that cannot be unseen. Even if the world refuses to notice, every step from this morning sets the stage for what comes next. Every choice, every decision, every movement that follows will build on the foundation you laid when you acted without waiting, when you moved without permission, when you decided without hesitation. You didn't just wake up, you woke something inside yourself. Something capable, something defiant, something unstoppable. And that is the moment when the unbelievable begins.